For decades, Vietnam was told through sterile numbers: 58,000 Americans dead, millions of Vietnamese fallen, tons of napalm dropped. But behind those figures were men. Youth sent into a jungle devouring bodies and souls, in a war with no front lines, no meaning, no end. These are not tales of glory. They are confessions of those who returned with their body intact but their spirit broken, of those who saw hell hidden among the green leaves and could never forget it. These are the true testimonies of American soldiers who fought in Vietnam, and this is the raw truth about war. First testimony, Philip Caputo, the illusion that became nightmare. Philip Caputo was 23 when he arrived in Da Nang on March 8, 1965, lieutenant of the Marines, part of the 1st American Combat Unit in Vietnam. He left America full of ideals, convinced he was fighting for freedom, to stop communism, to make a difference. What he found was very different. We arrived in Vietnam as crusaders. Youthful, naive, convinced we were the saviors. They told us the Vietnamese would greet us with open arms, that we would win in a few months. The reality hit us like a punch to the face as soon as we set foot in the jungle. There was no front, there were no enemy lines. The enemy was everywhere and nowhere. It could be the peasant who smiled at you in the morning and shot you in the back at night. It could be the child approaching with a grenade tied to his chest. You never knew who was friend and who was foe. That uncertainty devoured us from the inside. The heat was suffocating. The jungle was alive, hostile. Leeches sucked your blood while you slept, venomous snakes hidden in the tall grass, mosquitoes carrying disease. The humidity rotted your skin. We had open wounds that never healed, infections eating us alive. Boots disintegrated within weeks. Clothes were always wet with sweat, rain, sludge. But worst was the paranoia. You walked through rice paddies knowing underneath the water could be mines. You passed through villages where children played and women cooked, but you knew at night those same villages harbored Viet Cong guerrillas. You couldn't trust anyone. You couldn't let your guard down for a second. I remember the first time I saw one of my men die. He stepped on a mine. It didn't go off immediately. There was a click. He looked down, then at me, and his eyes told me everything. He understood. Then the explosion. We found parts of him on the trees. I picked up his dog tag from the mud. Even today, I don't know why I did. War changes you. It makes you do things you never thought possible. You see too much, you suffer too much, you lose too much. Anger replaces fear. Revenge replaces justice. We burned villages. We interrogated civilians with methods I dare not describe. We shot people who might have been innocent because we couldn't risk it. Every wrong choice could mean the death of your men. I recall a village. Snipers had plagued us for days. We couldn't find them. The order came, sweep everything. We entered house by house. We found underground bunkers, hidden weapons, food supplies for the guerrillas. Civilians swore they knew nothing. Maybe they told the truth. Maybe not. We burned everything anyway. That night, a boy in my platoon cried. He was 19. He said his mother would never recognize him again. He was right. None of us came back as the person who left. War doesn't just make victims on the battlefield. It makes them inside the souls of those who survive. After 13 months, I returned to America, physically intact, inside, destroyed. I understood the war had explained nothing. It had only shown what men are capable of when fear and violence become normal. It had shown that hell is not a place. It's a condition, and some of us never truly leave it. Second testimony, Michael Hare, the correspondent of Apocalypse. Michael Hare was not a soldier. He was a war correspondent for Esquire magazine. He arrived in Vietnam thinking he would report the war. Instead, the war swallowed him. What he saw and what he wrote became Dispatches, a book that Time magazine named one of the 100 best nonfiction books of all time. But before being a literary masterpiece, it was a cry of anguish. You can't understand Vietnam until you smell it. Cordite, jet fuel, chemical latrines, bodies in decay, marijuana, rancid sweat, all mixed into a nauseating cocktail that enters your nostrils and never leaves. Even years later, a similar smell, and you're there again. The kids fighting were 18, 19, 20, too young to drink legally in America, old enough to die in a jungle on the other side of the world. Many didn't understand why they were there. They followed orders, tried to survive, counted the days until home. Fear was constant. Not the kind that paralyzes you, but the kind that eats you slowly, empties you. You slept with your eyes open. You ate without taste. You laughed without joy. Everything became mechanical, automatic. You moved, spoke, breathed, but you weren't really living. You were just a shell waiting to be filled by a bullet or a fragment. The missions were absurd. We captured a hill losing 20 men, then abandoned it the next day. The following week, we took it back losing another 15. And for what? For nothing. There was no strategy. There was no progress, just senseless death. I saw a kid, newly arrived, smiling, full of energy. They gave him a rifle and sent him on patrol. He returned 8 hours later. He didn't smile anymore. He didn't speak. He stared into emptiness. Someone told me he had seen his buddy blow up on a booby trap. The kid had collected the pieces with his bare hands. 2 weeks later, he disappeared. No one ever knew where he went. The drugs were everywhere. Marijuana, heroin, opium. The guys smoked to forget, to sleep, to feel human again. The officers pretended not to see because they knew it was the only thing keeping some men going. Without it, they would have completely broken down. The helicopters were the only way to move in the jungle. Hueys, we called them. The sound of their blades is etched in my memory. When you hear that sound in films, something inside me still breaks. Those helicopters carried fresh soldiers to death and bagged bodies home. The cycle never stopped. I remember a pilot. He had flown hundreds of missions. His eyes were dead. He told me he hadn't slept for months, that he saw ghosts, that every time he closed his eyes he heard the screams of wounded men he had carried. He asked me if I thought he'd gone crazy. I didn't answer. What could I say? We were all crazy in one way or another. There was a phrase the guys repeated. It makes no sense. They said it to everything. Why are we here? It makes no sense. Why did he die and I didn't? It makes no sense. Why are we fighting to capture the same ground every week? It makes no sense. It was the answer to everything because it was the truth. Nothing in that war made sense. When I returned to America, people asked me questions. They wanted stories of heroism, of victories, of meaning. I had nothing to give them. I only had images of boys screaming in their sleep, bodies burned by napalm, villages razed to the ground, empty eyes that no longer saw a future. There was no heroism there. There was only survival, and sometimes not even that. Third testimony, Ron Kovic, the Marine who returned in a wheelchair. Ron Kovic was a patriot, born on the 4th of July, raised believing in the American dream. He enlisted in the Marines voluntarily, convinced he was serving his country. In Vietnam, he was hit in the back. The bullet damaged his spinal cord. He returned home paralyzed from the waist down. He was 21. I remember everything about the moment I was hit. The sound of the rifle, the sensation of falling, the immediate terror of not feeling my legs anymore. I screamed. My men surrounded me, loaded me onto a stretcher, and ran toward the helicopter. I remember the blood dripping, the excruciating pain in my back, the fear that I was about to die. But I did not die. Maybe it would have been easier. They took me to a field hospital, then to Japan, then to America. The operations, the therapies, the doctors with compassionate faces telling me I would never walk again. I did not believe them. I thought it was temporary, that I would recover, that I would return to who I had been. It took months before I understood the truth. I was paralyzed, forever. The Veterans Hospital was hell. Dirty beds, overworked nurses, constant screams of men in pain. There were boys without arms, without legs, without faces. Some were so badly burned they looked like monsters. Others were paralyzed like me. Others still were intact in body but shattered in mind. One night, the man in the bed next to mine began to scream. He screamed that the enemies were coming, that we had to defend ourselves. The nurses ran in, tied him to the bed, injected him with something. He kept moaning for hours. He said he saw his dead comrades. He said they were coming to take him. I covered my ears with my hands, but it did not help. The screams went inside me and never left. I learned to hate my wheelchair. I hated depending on others for everything. I hated not being able to control my own body. I hated the looks of pity from people in the street. I hated the empty phrases, "Thank you for your service." What service? For what? To come back like this? To be a burden? To be forgotten in a crumbling hospital? My mother cried when she saw me. She tried to be strong, to smile at me, to tell me everything was all right. But I saw the truth in her eyes. I saw the pain, the disappointment, the loss. I was no longer her son. I was a stranger in a broken body. The nightmares began immediately. Every night I went back to Vietnam. I heard the explosions, saw the bodies, felt the warm blood on my face. I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat, trembling. Sometimes I didn't know where I was. It took me minutes to realize I was home, safe. But I never felt safe. Vietnam was inside me. I began to ask questions. Why had I gone there? What had I been fighting for? For freedom? For democracy? Look around. The veterans were treated like garbage. The war had become unpopular. People spat on us, called us murderers. They had sent us there, they had destroyed us, and then they had abandoned us. Anger grew. Anger at the politicians who had lied, anger at the generals who had sent boys to the slaughter, anger at myself for being so stupid as to believe their lies. But above all, anger for what my life had become. I had been an athlete, a Marine, a strong man. Now I was trapped in a chair, dependent, useful to no one. It took years before I found a purpose. I became an anti-war activist. I started speaking, telling the truth, showing people what war does to men. Not for revenge, to prevent other boys from ending up like me, to prevent other mothers from mourning destroyed children. But even now, after all this time, I am not at peace. Vietnam is still with me. It is in the scars on my back. It is in the wheelchair. It is in the nightmares that do not let me go. It is in the knowledge that I gave my youth, my body, my soul, for a war that was worth nothing. Do not call me a hero. I am not a hero. I am only a broken man who is still trying to make sense of all this. Fourth testimony. Tim O'Brien, the infantryman who carried the weight of the dead. Tim O'Brien was drafted in 1968. He was 21 with a degree, dreams for the future. He considered fleeing to Canada to avoid the war, but in the end he boarded the train. Not out of patriotism, out of fear. Fear of disappointing his family, his friends, his country. He went to Vietnam because he was too afraid not to go. And that choice haunted him for the rest of his life. Everyone thinks war means bravery. It is not true. War means fear, constant, paralyzing fear. Fear of dying, of being mutilated, of going mad. But above all, fear of being a coward. Boys did brave things not because they were heroes. They did them because they were more afraid of seeming cowardly in front of their comrades than of dying. The things we carried to Vietnam were not just equipment. We carried letters from home, photos, amulets. We carried hopes of returning, but we also carried emotional weight, the weight of fear, the weight of responsibility for our comrades, the weight of the things we did and saw. I remember the weight of a dead body, literally. When a comrade fell, you had to carry him away. You could not leave him there. You hoisted him onto your shoulders and walked through the mud, under enemy fire, with his limbs dangling, his blood running over you. That weight never went away. Even after you put the body down, you still felt it. On your shoulders, in your soul. There was a boy in my platoon, Kiowa, a quiet, kind Native American. He was the kind of person who always listened, who never complained. One night we camped near a river. They told us it was safe. It was not. Mortars started falling in the middle of the night. Kiowa was hit. He sank into the mud in the shit of a sewage-filled irrigation field. We tried to pull him out, but the mud sucked him in. His hand slipped from ours. He vanished into the filth. He drowned in the shit. That day something broke in all of us. It was not just Kiowa's death. It was the way. Dying like that. without dignity, without meaning, like an animal in a swamp. And we were powerless. We couldn't even recover his body for days. When we pulled him out, he stank so badly that some boys vomited. We wrapped him in a tarp and sent him home. His mother received a sealed coffin. Violence changes people. You become numb. You see a body torn apart and you feel nothing. You participate in interrogations that become torture and convince yourself it is necessary. You shoot a person who may have been innocent and tell yourself you had no choice. And maybe it's true. But that justification does not remove the weight. After I killed a man for the first time, I stood still and stared at him. He was young, thin, wearing sandals. He probably had a family, maybe children. I pictured him at home, laughing with friends, eating rice, living a normal life. Then I pictured him dead by my hand. That image never went away. The boys told stories to process the trauma. True stories, invented stories, half-true stories. Sometimes you didn't know what was real and what was not. But it didn't matter. Stories were the way to survive, to make sense of the senseless, to remember the dead without going insane. There was a story we always told, of a boy who had shot a water buffalo for revenge. The buffalo belonged to a woman whose little girl had been killed. The boy methodically shot the buffalo, making it suffer for hours before it died. It was a true story. But every time we told it, the details changed. Sometimes the boy cried, other times he laughed. I no longer know what really happened. I only know we all understood that rage, that need to make something, someone, suffer because you yourself were suffering. When I returned home, people asked me the stupidest question: did you kill anyone? They didn't know that question tears you apart, makes you relive everything. There is no right answer. If you say yes, they look at you like a monster. If you say no, they assume you did not see real combat. The truth is, it does not matter whether you pulled the trigger or not. In Vietnam, we all killed, with our actions, with our presence, with our war. And we all carry that weight, the weight of the things we did, the weight of the things we saw, the weight of the things we carried and still carry. Fifth testimony. Harold Kushner, the doctor in the jungle cages. Harold Kushner was an army doctor. In December 1967, he was captured by the Viet Cong. He spent 5 years and 3 months as a prisoner of war, hidden in the Cambodian jungle. There were no organized camps, only bamboo cages, constantly hunger, deadly diseases, and total isolation from the world. Many of his comrades died. He survived, but paid a price no one should ever have to pay. When they captured me, I thought it would last weeks, maybe months. I couldn't imagine years. 5 years in the jungle. 5 years of hunger, disease, slow death. With each passing day, a piece of me died. The cages were small, 1 meter wide, 2 long, high enough to sit, not enough to stand. Made of woven bamboo with a roof of leaves. When it rained, water flooded you. When the sun was out, the heat cooked you. You couldn't escape. You couldn't move. You could only exist. Food was a bowl of rice a day, sometimes less. The rice was spoiled, filled with worms and insects. At first, I tried to remove them. After a week, I ate them with the rice. They were protein. You had to survive. Hunger devours not only the body, but also the mind. You think only of food. You dream of food. You talk about food. My comrades and I spent hours describing imaginary meals. Steaks, burgers, pizza, ice cream. It was our escape. But when we woke up, there was always only rotten rice. Diseases were the real enemy. Malaria, dysentery, beriberi, tropical infections. Without medicine, without instruments, I could do very little as a doctor. I watched my comrades die one by one. I saw them wasting away. Feverish, delirious. I held their hands as they slipped away. I closed their eyes, and I knew soon it would be my turn. There was a boy, Bobby Garwood, very young. Hunger was killing him. He became so thin you could count every bone. His eyes sank in. His skin turned gray. One night he stopped breathing. I thought he was dead, but the next morning he was still breathing, weakly. The human body is incredibly resistant, but also incredibly fragile. We knew nothing of the outside world. We didn't know if the war was ending, if anyone was looking for us, if our families thought we were dead. The days blended together. You lost all sense of time. A month felt like a year. A year felt like eternity. Some prisoners went insane. They talked to themselves. They laughed for no reason. They screamed in their sleep. One became convinced he was already dead, that we were all ghosts. Another refused to eat, said it wasn't worth it. He died 3 weeks later. The guards weren't cruel out of sadism. They were indifferent. To them, we were enemies, invaders. Whether we lived or died didn't matter. Sometimes they brought medicine, sometimes not. Sometimes blankets, sometimes nothing. There was no logic, no predictability, and that uncertainty consumed you. I clung to routine. Every morning I woke up, counted the bamboo slats of my cage, repeated in my mind the names of my dead comrades. It was my way to stay sane, to remember who I was, to not become an animal. I remember the day they told us the war was over. I didn't believe it. I thought it was a cruel joke. But then the helicopters came. Americans. They pulled us out of the cages. Some of us couldn't walk. I weighed 40 kilos. My legs were skeletons. My teeth were loose. I had infections everywhere. But I was alive. When I finally returned to America, everything felt unreal. The colors were too vivid, the noises too loud, the people too happy. I couldn't reconnect. I had been away so long that I no longer belonged to this world. I was still trapped in that cage, in that jungle, in those endless years. Even today, I can't stay in closed spaces. If a door closes, panic. If I'm in a small room, I feel the walls closing in. My mind goes back there, to the cage, to the heat, to the hunger, to the feeling that I would never get out again. Many ask me how I survived. I don't know. Maybe luck, maybe stubbornness, maybe it was just my body refusing to give up even when my mind wanted to. But I know part of me stayed in that jungle, buried with my comrades who never came home. These men still carry the scars of Vietnam, not only on their bodies, but in their souls. Their testimonies are not stories of heroism. They are cries of pain, confessions of guilt, admissions of loss. They remind us that behind every war, there are human beings who suffer, who break, who lose themselves. Vietnam was not only a military defeat, it was a human tragedy. A generation of young men was sent to fight a war without meaning, without a clear purpose, without a chance of victory. And when they came home, they were forgotten, despised, and abandoned. Their voices deserve to be heard, not to glorify war, but to understand it, to see what it really does to men, to remember that every uniform hides a person, and that every person who goes to war pays a terrible price that no one should ever have to pay. This is a warning, because war doesn't end when the soldiers come home. It continues in their minds, in their nightmares, in their broken souls. And until we listen to their stories, until we understand their pain, we will be condemned to repeat the same mistakes again and again and again.